Yeah, we're Russia. We're so great. You know, fucking Scott Ritter says this and Scott Ritter says that. So now I have to spend my weekend at the whiteboard teaching people that he's fucking stupid. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Habitual Line Crosser, and today, well, we have another installment of HLC's Classroom. And what we're going to talk about is some statements made by Scott Ritter, of all people. Him and that colonel can both just fuck all the way off, but I'm going to explain why I have those opinions here very shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, so recently the claim has been made by Scott Ritter. Before I explain who he is, the claim was made that if you attack Russian air defense, they'll simply make an adjustment and then it won't work anymore. Now, before I explain why that is a colossally stupid take, not for the reasons that you're thinking, let me explain some things. Okay, first of all, Scott Ritter served in the United States Marine Corps as enlisted, and then he commissioned in the late 1980s, early 1990s, where he became an intelligence officer. He served for about 12 years total, enlisted and commissioned, and then he got out and became a UN weapons inspector, where they were going into Iraq in the early 1990s after Desert Storm and disabling and disassembling weapons of mass destruction there in Iraq. And then, of course, he had some personal beef with it, so he resigned and blah. Scott Ritter has been a staunch advocate for American adversaries for quite some time now, and he's disagreed with the United States on many things that are incredibly hot takes. Now, why would you not trust the word of Scott Ritter? Well, here's the thing. I have a personal beef that if somebody does something in one part of their life, potentially other parts of their life are also really bad, right? In 2001, Scott Ritter was arrested while trying to meet a 16-year-old girl who was a undercover police officer in a sting.
How you doing? All right. Can you have a seat over in that chair, please?
Eventually, the charges were dismissed, and he blamed it on a smear campaign because he was against the buildup of going into Iraq, which is plausible, right? Right? Like, okay, they did this, deep state, all those things, Illuminati, whatever words you want to use, that's fine. But the problem is, in 2009, he did it again with a police officer posing as a 15-year-old underage girl, and he served 2 years in prison for it. I tend to not get my tactical information from people who like to diddle kids. Hot take, I guess. I guess that's a hot take in the modern world nowadays. But Russia seems to be a big fan of him. Probably some clear indications there. So his claim that if you attack Russian air defense, then they're simply going to adjust and what you did won't work anymore. Literally, every army in history does that. If something works on the battlefield, you do it until it doesn't work. And then if you figure out a way to stop the enemy from doing something that works, then they will try and figure out something else that works. That's how battles work. That's how battles have been throughout all of history. But let's go ahead and break this down first doctrinally, and then I'll talk about a little bit more of the air defense side of the house. Spoiler alert, a lot of that stuff I can't really go into, so I'm going to be speaking mainly about just kind of missiles in general, not any specific system. So I want to start out with the US military is so dedicated to how we understand the battlefield and how we can adjust and how the battlefield is a dynamic landscape that we doctrinally base this. For example, you've probably heard of the acronym MDMP, which is the military decision-making process. It is a 7-step process used by battalion and higher to prepare for and operate in an environment. That being said, before we get into MDMP, I want to start out with first the principles of mission command. Now, I love the principles of mission command because since the invasion of Ukraine, I literally use the Russian military as an example of failures of the principles of mission command. Allow me to explain. The first principle of mission command is competence. Now, I know there's jokes in here. That's low-hanging fruit. I'm better than that. Maybe I'm not. I might squeeze some in anyways, but I digress. Competence. You must ensure that everybody in your organization is competent to a certain level so that they can accomplish their mission effectively. The US military, for example, uses these things called METLs, or Mission Essential Task List. METL. Yeah, we don't know how to spell things, but we make really fucking a shit ton of acronyms. Now, each of these METLs are in a database somewhere, and what happens is your unit in their assigned mission has to figure out what their medal is, and let's say that one of their medals is conduct expeditionary deployment operations. There is a list of hundreds of things in there that your unit has to be proficient in before anyone is allowed to deploy you. Now, naturally, there's caveats to this. If you need people in the fight, you can go around these things. I'm sure there's a memorandum for fucking everything nowadays. But competence is number one. Principle number two, mutual trust. Now, it's important that we talk about trust in general, because according to Army Doctrine Publication 1, written by General Ray Odierno, trust is the bedrock of our profession. Now, if you look at in there, you have, I think it's called the Tenets of Leadership. It goes off of SHIMT, which is stewardship of the profession, honorable service, esprit de corps, military expertise, and trust. That's on the enlisted side. The principles of mission command really affect the officer side, but the reason why mutual trust is in there is because you as a leader cannot do everything yourself. Mutual trust goes up and down, meaning not only do your subordinates have to trust you as a leader, but you also have to trust your subordinates, because you may have to put a subordinate in a position where they have to fight so that way you and the rest of your element can move in a different direction. That's a mutual trust right there. This is also something we don't see on the battlefields of Ukraine from the Russian military. Number three is shared understanding. God, that one is so blindingly obvious. Shared understanding, meaning that every person in that organization, all the way down to the lowest level private, needs to understand exactly what their job is. You don't just stick them in a position and say, guard this position. Well, technically you could, because that would be the understanding of their mission orders. But understanding the mission overall, which is why it is a principle of mission command. Next up, we have commander's intent. Now, a lot of people think that, like, well, when the president says this has to be done, the president has to come up with a plan. No, the president doesn't. That's what commander's intent is. The intent, let's say that President Trump came out right now and said, bing, bing, bong, and said, we need to defeat the government of Iran. Theoretically, of course, I don't want war, but let's just say that's what he said. It's not his job anymore. Everybody below him needs to figure out their level of the slice of the pie. And let's say we're going to go with the Army, because the Army makes sense to me, because that's what I work with. The Army says we're going to build, get a ground force, and eventually we need to push into Tehran. Okay, the next level commanders below them need to figure out how they get to that level. This is how commander's intent works. And when it gets all the way down to that lowest level soldier, they're looking at the company commander's intent, which is derived from the battalion, derived from the brigade, derived from the division, so on and so forth, all the way up. So let's say that when you get all the way down to that level, that lowest level private, their commander's intent from their commander is to seize a specific objective at a specific time. That soldier needs to understand everything about seizing that objective in that time. That is what's called commander's intent. Now, it's not one of the principles of mission command, but it's also important to highlight commander's planning guidance. That gives you a left or right limit. That's pretty much NCOs, non-commissioned officers, myself and many other NCOs, we work in what is called the gray, between where we are and where we need to be. Where we need to be is the commander's intent. Where we are is just where the hell we are. Now, commanders put up bumpers left and right, and those are called commander's planning guidance. They say, and the commander's planning guidance is something simple like, you need to make sure this is done by this day. You need to make sure that this is done by this time. You need to make sure that you avoid civilian casualties as much as humanly possible. That is things that the NCOs need to take into account when conducting the commander's mission. That's how that works. Moving on to the next one, we have disciplined initiative. God, this one is so incredibly fucking important. Look, I don't drink all the Kool-Aid in the Army, but this one, like the principles of mission command, I feel like they really fucking nailed it with this one. So disciplined initiative, what that means is that no matter what happens, every person at every level is willing to do exactly what they have to do to achieve that goal. Now, what's interesting is I got my most experience with the principles of mission command when I make my students write an essay about Operation Anaconda. Now, it's really kind of cool when you look at how Operation Anaconda went down. So it was in the Shai-Khad Valley in Afghanistan. It was the first major engagement between the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and the United States. And that was also a valley that Russia tried 3 times to seize and never did. The US did after 17 days. Get fucking wrecked, posers. Emotional damage. But in those 17 days, they had about 200 airstrikes a day for about 7 days straight. You drop the 10th mountain in there, and they were completely surrounded because the 10th mountain, they were using a hammer and anvil tactic, the hammer being the 10th mountain, and the anvil being the Afghan army, or, well, the freedom fighters that they had that were friendly to the United States. Well, shit went south. The freedom fighters fucking bailed out because they're Afghans, they're fucking cowards. That's just kind of how they work. And the US was left there outnumbered and completely fucking surrounded. A bad situation. Discipline initiative. Every single member of that organization understood that they had a job to do, or the person to the left or the right of them was going to die. That's what discipline initiative looks like. You have a job to do, and no matter what happens, you have to continue doing that job. That's why discipline initiative is important to the principles of mission command. And the last one is risk acceptance. This one, while it primarily affects officers, the NCO side of the house, the non-commissioned officer side of the house, does dabble in risk acceptance. Now, inherently, there's risk in any operation you do in any aggressor nation's area, or even in our own nation. There is risk everywhere. Now, there's certain levels of risk, and if you spend enough time in the military, you understand what levels of risk you can assume and what levels have to go higher. Like, I understand if I'm on the battlefield and my commander's intent is to seize an objective and I am heavily outnumbered, I need to assess the risk in trying to continue to push or to hold my position and wait for reinforcements. That is something I have to do internally. If I was an infantry guy, I'm an air defender. I'm fucking slurping on big gulps inside an air-conditioned ECS. Okay, leave me alone. But that being said, that is what risk acceptance looks like. Now, commanders, officers, and NCOs at every level in the chain have a level of risk acceptance. Now, that part is not doctrinally based. You just learn at what level you can accept risk. After just years of doing it, you figure out, like, I can make this call. And sometimes it's above my pay grade. That happens probably once a week to me. I have to call my first sergeant, like, yo, this is above my pay grade. What do you want me to do? And he's like, do this. Okay, cool. Because he knows that's his level of risk acceptance. That's something he is capable of accepting, something I'm not capable of accepting. And every once in a great while, he's like, let me call Sergeant Major, because he understands it's above his risk level. So then he sends it to the Sergeant Major, so on and so forth. That is what risk acceptance looks like on the battlefield. And those are the principles of mission command. That is the reason why I use those, or why I explain those, using Russia on the battlefield. Now, what does this have to do with Russia being able to adjust? We are getting to that. There's a lot of doctrinal things that I want to get through before I really break into that. So, combat power. How does the United States define combat power? Well, don't worry, I got you covered. The definition of combat power is the combined total means of constructive, destructive, and information capabilities that a unit or formation can apply at any given time. And the way I help my students remember that is no one builds shit, breaks shit, or knows shit as fast as Uncle Sam. We can take the population of a location and reduce it to 0 and have a Burger King there in less than 24 hours. We've done it before. We can do it again. Hashtag fucking Seabees. All right. They build shit. They build a lot of shit. Now, the definition of combat power is important, but what I'm tying into that is the elements of combat power. Now, the elements of combat power, this one I don't have memorized, so I actually have to look at my notes for this, is leadership, information, mission command, movement, maneuver, intelligence, fires, sustainment, and protection. Now, I have this wonderful graphic that I've sent to GVan, and I want him to pop it up at this point in time. There's a whole lot going on this graphic, but it's important to show how the principles of mission command, as well as the elements of combat power, all tie in together. Holy cow. Look at that. I'm sure it's probably pixelated because it's a pretty small image overall, but you see how movement, maneuver, intelligence, fire, sustainment, protection all feed into command and control, leadership, and mission command in the middle, which all then feed out, and they all feed off of each other. Like this, it's all just one moving piece, and this is the way the US military looks at fighting in austere environments. So a lot of that, especially when you're talking about movement and maneuver, is adjusting. Sustainment is adjusting. Literally everything up there is adjusting on the battlefield at all times, because you are trying to find the way to eliminate the highest number of enemies while losing the fewest number of your own soldiers. Sailors, Marines, airmen, fucking guardians. I feel like it was a really missed opportunity. They didn't call them Spartans. Looking to you, Space Force. But there's a lot going on in that graphic, and I want to make sure you guys see that. So, the battlefield in and of itself is dynamic. It's constantly changing. I mean, okay. Information is the most powerful tool on the battlefield. Now, not all information has the same level of power, but information is more powerful than any gun, than any bomb, than any tank, than anything. And so much so, the United States military has realized this, that we have a layered approach to information. Now we're getting into MDMP. So the MDMP, the military decision-making process, step 2 is called mission analysis. Now in mission analysis, that is where you gather all your intelligence. And in there you have something called IPB, which is intelligence preparation of the battlefield. HLC, what's IPB? Don't worry, it's a 4-step process. But we're not even there yet, because step 1 is a fucking 6-step process. So Step one of intelligence preparation of the battlefield is define the operational environment. Well, how do you define an operational environment? You can't say it's just, well, we're going to Pennsylvania, Arkansas, and it's hot. No, there's a process to it. What we use to define the operational environment is what is called the OE variables, or the operational environment variables. They are PMESI PT. I'm going to just say them all, okay? It's political, military, economic, social, information, infrastructure, physical environment, and time. Those variables, once you have identified every single one of those variables in the area in which you're going to, you can define the operational environment. So that is just the definition of where you're going and what is going on there. That's it. That's literally it. That many layers for just figuring that out. That is how important information is on the battlefield. You want to make sure you have all of the data and all of the variables. Now people will be like, well, what about the mission variables? Mission variables are MET-TC, which stands, I don't have this one memorized, so I actually got to look at it. Mission, enemy, terrain and weather, troops available, time available, and civilian considerations. Operational variables are for the entire operation, like Operation Desert Storm. The mission variables are for specific units to do specific missions. That's the main difference you have there. Now that we've defined all of this stuff, and you understand the layered approach to literally everything we do, when it comes to decision making, when it comes to information, when it comes to intelligence, when it comes to dynamic moves on the battlefield, everything has a layered approach. So now, to the whiteboard. All right, back down at the whiteboard. So here we go. Okay, when we're talking about adjusting on the battlefield, I'm going to go with what I know best, which is obviously air defense. Now, I can't tell you exactly what adjustments are made. I can't tell you how they affect the system. There's a lot that I can't say, but what I can tell you is that the enemy for a long time has been making adjustments to the way missiles fly, how they work, everything. So we're going to just pretend that our target area is somewhat flat. You guys still got all my doodles and stuff from the last time. I haven't even cleaned this whiteboard. And then you got your air defense system right here, looking kind of similar to that. So throughout the years, everyone assumes that when a ballistic missile is falling or anything like that, it's a ballistic missile that does a ballistic arc and just drops in on the target. Now for years, that was the case. But then in 1991, actually, it might have been 89. Could have been 90. I don't know. But the first ever guided missile intercept was US Patriot in Saudi Arabia. This changed warfare completely because the Scud is not really a great missile. And Saddam figured that out pretty damn quick. Now, while our probability of kill at that point in time is questioned by many, we learned a lot. Battle in general is learning. Exponential learning. That is all you do on the battlefield. Every time your enemy does something, you try and figure out a way to counter it. That's how tactics work in general. So the enemy started doing things like they would make their missiles, as they're coming down, they would break open. This is called ERS, or early release submunitions. There are ways to combat that. The enemy started making their missiles do flips and twists to try and evade air defense systems. There are ways to deal with that in a dynamic way on the battlefield. The enemy started making their missiles as they're coming in. Do like the moonwalk, kind of zigzag, and then back to where they're trying to get to. There are ways to combat that on the battlefield. There's a lot of different things that a lot of different missiles do. Now with that being said, certain missiles can only do certain things. So as your radar is looking into the sky, what you do is you tell it what to look for. And every time the enemy changes something, you learn. The United States has more sensors all over the world than pretty much everybody else in the world combined. We are looking at everything. So this is the thing. When people beat their chest about Russia firing a new missile, congratulations. Every single time you fire a missile, the US learns about a capability. When North Korea fires a missile, we watch it. We learn about a capability. Every time you fire anything, your enemy learns. This is very similar to like when you're in direct combat and you fire a rifle and it shows a muzzle flash. Now the bad guys who survive know where you are. The same thing goes for missiles, more or less. But every time a missile does something or does something new and somebody sees, you learn something. We're gonna go back up. So like I said, everything is learning. That's all you're doing on the battlefield. When we were in Afghanistan 6 months after we got there, we were fighting different. The Russians fighting in Ukraine are fighting different than they did at the initial invasion. The Ukrainians fighting against the Russians are fighting different than they did because everybody is looking for that proverbial wonder weapon, the thing that works better than anything else. Everyone is looking for that. So basically his tweet kind of got under my skin, and I wanted to explain how dumb of a take this was, because his take in general is basically just saying, if you shoot at an enemy army, they're going to shoot back. Yeah, no shit. It's not that big of a statement. Every air defense systems in general, air defense in general is not a static thing. If you think that someone goes out there, sets up an S-400 and leaves it there and never changes anything about the system, never changes the way the radar looks, the frequency the radar's at, or any of the other things that could possibly change, I'm unsure of all the variables that you can change in an S-400. I'm very familiar with the Patriot ones, but I'm not sure how many of those I can say. But if you think that they just go out there, set up the system, and expect it to work flawlessly, you're wrong. That's not the way air defense works in general. You hope that you get information soon enough, or you're able to change things soon enough that it keeps you alive. The reality is, nothing is 100%. And that's the reality of battle. So I definitely wanted to explain the doctrinal basis and kind of how things work in general when it comes to operations on the battlefield, and how we have really began to focus, at least in the US military, on intelligent leadership. Now I know that's kind of an oxymoron to some people, like, man, my leadership's fucking stupid. Well, they at least had enough smarts to pass the tests, at the very least. But this is some of the things that I actually teach. And don't worry, I got all this from Google. This is all Googleable. You can find all of this stuff. And I know that my talk at the whiteboard was kind of bland. Had to do that on purpose. I also didn't talk about cruise missiles when people are talking about cruise missiles. The world in general, every country. I don't know of a single one that fights the same no matter what. Don't know of a single one. Well, maybe Russians. They do a lot of meat wall tactics. It's strange. It's so weird. We know this isn't working. We should try something different. I mean, they're just throwing a lot of missiles and bombs, but I digress. So basically, what I want you guys to understand is, don't get your information from people who like to diddle children. Get your information from someone who has missiletism. I'm just kidding. Go learn yourself some stuff. And the reason why I started this entire thing with the book answers is because I want you to know that what I'm telling you is not bullshit. It's all doctrinally based. So with that being said, I think I'm going to change it up. I think from now on, my statement at the end, instead of not giving into the 22 a day, which is an important statement, I'm going to change it a little bit, because I had a very recent eye-opening experience that I realized that a lot of vets out there, they don't want the coddled, polite approach. They need an objective. So let me break out the old knife hand. I got to put it underneath this, or else I'll chop that thing in half. Don't do the enemy a fucking favor. That's how I'm going to tell it to you guys from now on. The enemy wants you dead. Don't give them that fucking satisfaction. Don't do that favor for them. That being said, every single one of you are amazing. If you would like to support the channel, please go to habituallinecrosser.com. Get yourself a shirt. I got some new shirts coming out here very, very soon. Kind of excited about those. But the cheapest way to support the channel is, of course, just watch my videos. Play me out.